So I moved to Africa when I was 23. And they told me when I arrived that it wouldn't rain for 8 months. And I thought for sure they were joking or maybe exaggerating. But the rain didn't come. In Niger, where I was living, temperatures reach over 100 degrees most of the year. And there was one 3-month rainy season in which to grow all the food they need. 8.5 months later, when the rain came, farmers gathered the seed that they had saved for planting. Too early, and the young plants would wither and die without adequate rainfall. Too late, and they would run out of food before the crop was ready to harvest. These and so many other challenges are the realities for small-scale farmers in our world today. But it doesn't have to be that way. For the last 12 years, I've worked for ECHO, an organization that teaches sustainable agriculture techniques to small-scale farmers, less than 5 acres. These are plants, practices, and appropriate technologies that have the potential to drastically improve someone's livelihood, their nutrition, their health, and their future. Through this work, I have traveled the world, and I've toured our own neighborhoods. I've seen some organizations doing powerful work, and some others making messes for others to clean up. And what I've come to believe is that the key to making a lasting difference in this world is to share knowledge. So let's talk about sharing knowledge. Today, it is faster for me to tie my 6-year-old's shoes than for her to do it. But if I never share with her the knowledge of how to tie shoes, I may one day have a 12-year-old asking for help with their shoes. Or I may have a frustrated 6-year-old trying to tie them herself without guidance. This is a very basic principle, but it illustrates the kind of techniques that we can learn and some principles that help each one of us in the room help others in sustainable ways. Principle number 1, relief only helps in the short term. In an audience this size, I think of some of you have probably needed immediate aid. Hurricanes, fires, floods, to name a few. Sometimes people need food and supplies just to survive. But long term, if that continues and someone has no other option than to rely on others for their basic necessities, it can lead to frustration, unmet expectations, lower the recipient's dignity, and ultimately end in resentment. In the book Dead Aid, there's a story about a mosquito net maker in Africa. He employs 10 people, and they together make 500 nets a week. But no matter how hard they work, they can't combat the malaria-carrying mosquito. So what happens when well-meaning donors send 100,000 mosquito nets to their area? The nets arrive, they're distributed, and a good deed is done. Shortly thereafter, our mosquito net maker is out of business, and his 10 employees are forced to adapt or go hungry. When we think about the short term, aid appears to have worked, but in the long term, they're actually worse off in the long run. Principle number 2, sometimes the wrong help actually does more harm than good. A wealthy American took teams of tourists to plant 500 gardens in Swaziland for the poor. My friend's sister was on one of these trips, and they planted the gardens with so much love and enthusiasm. But it wasn't until years later did she learn that their garden had then been removed, and another team came and planted another garden in its place. The community had stopped depending on gardening for their livelihood and instead had started to rely on influx of generous visitors. And there's the orphanage in Mexico that my friend Renee painted on 3 different trips to the area within 4 years. She started to think that was pretty weird. And then she talked to one of the staff of the orphanage, and they said, oh yes, every trip, every team that comes to the orphanage paints the walls. Not because they needed to be painted, but because it gave young, unskilled workers something to do when they came on their mission trips. So think about the painters in that community. that could have been given valuable work. And think about the children who have people come and play with them for a week, take pictures with them, and then leave without a trace. These kinds of trips cause emotional stress on already stressed children. And principle number 3, creating dependency stunts future growth. If we look long term, if someone has no other option than to rely on someone else for their needs, they're not incentivized to look for other options. According to Victoria Stanford at the University of Edinburgh, what causes dependency is when aid is used, intentionally or not, as a long-term strategy that inhibits development, progress, or reform. And food aid is especially dangerous because it disincentivizes local food production by reducing the local market demand. So if we go back to my daughter tying her shoes, today she has to wait until someone else has time to help her. But when she is the master of how to tie shoes, then she decides how and when her shoes are laced. Empowerment in poverty and hunger reduction means that the recipients are part of the process. They direct the outcomes to meet the needs of their communities, and they are the masters of the level and what actually happens with their livelihood. Empowerment in poverty and hunger reduction fosters self-sufficiency, promotes dignity, and provides sustainability. So I want to tell you about the Kitamaris. They're some of the most impressive farmers that I've ever met. As generationally they inherited land from their fathers, the Kitamaris had barely enough corn land to grow enough food for their family. But they tried. Then they met a partner organization. Through hands-on training, they were taught ways to improve their soil. They were taught what to do with this corn to make small, minor adjustments. And they were given suggestions of what else they could grow to diversify their cropland. The Kitamaris took that knowledge and they created a vibrant, diverse garden that gave them plenty of livelihood to provide for their families. They invested in the soil, and so their corn harvest was more plentiful. And so they limited the amount of corn space they needed, and they diversified into sack gardens where they can grow leafy green vegetables and vanilla beans, which is a highly valuable crop. They also decided to share their knowledge with hundreds of other people. They have built a little shelter on their land, and in it they have a guest book with each name, valuable name of persons that they have trained. And it doesn't stop there. They are partnering with ECHO to offer trainings for other people in their communities and beyond. Pha Mui is a rice farmer in northern Thailand, and she was in debt year after year due to the high costs of fertilizer that she needed to contribute to her farmland. Someone met her and shared with her the system of rice intensification. This is a technique that uses less seed and less water and spaces the plants further apart so they have less competition. So Pha Mui, who was one failed harvest away from starvation and ruin, tried SRI and the traditional method side by side. There was no room for error. And the results were remarkable. She saw that SRI worked better, more reliably. She got a greater harvest, more pound per hectare, and she decided to go fully into SRI rice. Now she is an organic SRI rice farmer that not only sells rice from her farm, but also in markets in Bangkok where she can get a higher price. And she's created a market locally for organic brown rice powder that's used as a health supplement. Pha Mui could have gotten discouraged in the cycle of hunger and poverty, but because of someone that believed in her enough to empower her with knowledge, she is a self-sufficient businesswoman. She was telling me this story, and she said, I'm getting older. Sometimes people ask me, do I ever feel tired? Yes, she said, I do. But then I count my money, and all the tiredness completely disappears. So how can you and I become part of stories like these? You could start by teaching someone to tie their shoes. Look around your community, your world, and see what needs exist that you could learn and then teach. You can make a lasting difference, and the key is sharing knowledge. What I want for you to take away today is that empowering people with knowledge is far more effective in the long run than aid. There are many organizations that are doing this. We have to be selective, find them, and get involved. We should be the kind of donors or volunteers that support sustainable initiatives to hunger and poverty, to make sure one day outside help is not needed. We should be the kind of business people that partner with long-term solutions. And we should be the kind of nonprofits that go beyond relief and invest in not only today, but the futures of families and communities. You know, when you think about it, knowledge is the only resource that never runs out the more that it's shared. Instead, it is multiplied. Thank you so much.